can't see you anymore, but I can still see my script. You can see me okay?
Yes, Prabhu, we can see you and hear you properly.
Okay. All right. Well, after a late start, Prabhus, Hare Krishna. Thank you for welcoming me back, and thank you for your patience. Good to be online with you again. So today's Founder Acharya Essentials lesson is called His Varnashram Challenge. Now, between 1965 and 1977, Srila Prabhupada wrote dozens of books, opened over 100 centers, and initiated thousands of disciples worldwide. By 1977, his non-stop sacrifice had taken its toll on his body. Returning to Vrindavan to continue translating Sanskrit texts about Krishna into English, Prabhupada observed that his days on earth were numbered. When a disciple later asked if His Divine Grace had any regrets, Prabhupada acknowledged that he had, quote, one lamentation. That you have not finished translating the Srimad Bhagavatam? No, that I have not established Varnashram. And we know that from an interview with Prabhupada's nurse. My godbrother Abhiram Prabhu was serving Prabhupada as his personal nurse that last year. So it wasn't actually recorded, but Abhiram reported this, and Prabhupada has said more or less the same thing in other places too. So his one lamentation was that he had not yet established Varnashram. That timeless culture which shepherds us from the material to the spiritual realm. Varnashram appears repeatedly in Prabhupada's teachings. Yet, Prabhupada had been so busy spreading the Hare Krishna movement, he scarcely had time to demonstrate Varnashram's practical application in the modern age. Indeed, only in the last years of his life did he identify Varnashram's social and spiritual benefits as the key to attracting humanity en masse to Krishna. Quote, this is the next aspect of Krishna consciousness which I wish to push forward. This is a quote from a letter, actually. On these farms, we can demonstrate the full Varnashram system. If these farms become successful, then the whole world will be enveloped by Krishna consciousness. In the cities, we are interested for preaching, but we cannot present the ideal Varnashram system. This is possible only at the farms, so they are very important. That was excerpts from a letter that Prabhupada wrote to Harish Shauri Prabhu, and those excerpts were noted down by Tamal Krishna Maharaj in his diary. So I hear the leaf blower in the background again. Okay, anyway.
We can hear you, Prabhu. We can hear you.
Well, he's not here yet. You'll probably hear him too soon. Okay, it's coming on. Now, despite the importance Prabhupada gave to Varnashram, his followers have been slow to embrace this most challenging aspect of his mission. Okay, here you can. I'm going to try my Bluetooth. Let's see if that works. Okay, can you hear me now, Prabhu?
Yes, Prabhu.
Oh, good. Okay. Okay, so to understand why we've been so slow to embrace the Varnashram phase of Prabhupada's mission, let's first of all look at the different ways Prabhupada used the term Varnashram. There's often a lot of confusion about Varnashram because Prabhupada, in fact, used the term in 4 different ways. If you don't know those different ways, then you're confused about what Prabhupada means by Varnashram. Okay, the 4 ways. So the first way Prabhupada used the term was what I call Vedic Varnashram. According to India's Vedic literature, Krishna consciousness once flourished all over the world with a culture that was at once scientific and spiritual, down to earth and also out of this world. Developing their natural vocations or varnas and transcending them in stages or ashrams, people found harmony and fulfillment working together to please Lord Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In the Bhagavad Gita 4:13, Lord Krishna teaches, quote, according to the 3 modes of material nature and the work associated with them, the 4 divisions of human society are created by me, unquote. As the parts of the body work together to serve the whole, in Varnashram, 4 broad vocational groups cooperate to serve the social body. Now, in Vedic times, the guardians of that cooperation were samskars, sacred rites of passage through stages of spiritual progress. Prior to conceiving a child, for example, cultured people meditated on the divine, well aware that life comes from life and that the quality of their progeny, the life they were bringing into the world, the quality would reflect the quality of their consciousness, especially at conception. Quote, that is Vedic civilization, Prabhupada observed. Samskar before the birth and immediately after the birth, then one after another. Marriage is also another samskar. These are dasha vida samskar, 10 purificatory rites. Prabhupada continues, but where is samskar going on today? Nobody takes care of samskar. Still they are declaring that I am Brahman, highborn. Therefore the conclusion is, kalo shudra sambhavaha. Everyone is lowborn. Prabhupada is using the word shudra there in the derogatory sense of lowborn, although the shudra varna is perfectly respectable. In fact, that's what most of us, that's the varna most of us are in. Indeed, the modern chaos, now Prabhupada said that, by the way, on a morning walk, 10th of April, 74 in Bombay. Indeed, the modern chaos reflects the general quality of the world's population, as if born of a bottle of beer on Saturday night. The sacred act that once called souls to enter the world to revive their love of God is today routinely reduced to a contact sport, hostile to its natural outcome, conception. Indeed, those who make it into a womb today often don't make it out alive. As much as Prabhupada liked to present Krishna consciousness as the positive alternative to modern civilization, he knew the days of classic Vedic Varnashram, which he called the days of yore, were gone. To spread Krishna consciousness everywhere in modern times would require a special adaptation of Varnashram culture, according to what Prabhupada called time, candidate, and country. So that's the first way Prabhupada used the term in a Vedic sense. The second way he used it, I call dormant, sleeping, or you could say latent or potential varnashram. Though classic varnashram may be gone, its dormant realities endure, awaiting activation. For example, despite utopian attempts to make humanity classless, by nature, classes remain. Speaking with a Russian professor in Moscow during the Soviet era, Prabhupada compared Varnashram to the sun. So this is a quote from Prabhupada's talk with Professor Kotovsky. Quote, so sunshine is here in America, in Russia, in India, everywhere. Similarly, this Varnashram system is prevalent everywhere in some form or other. Just like the Brahmanas. The Brahmanas means the most intelligent class of men. Brain of the society. Then the Kshatriyas, the administrator class. Then the Vaishyas, the productive class. And the Shudras, the worker class. These four classes are everywhere, present in different names. And because it is creation by the original creator, it is prevalent everywhere. Varnashram. That was famous room conversation with Professor Kotovsky on the 22nd of June, 1971 in Moscow. We only have the recording because Shyam Sundar Prabhu, my godbrother, he was assisting Prabhupada in that conversation. And he snuck a tape recorder into the room. And for that reason, when you hear the recording, it's a little muffled. I have a hunch it was Shyam Sundar was hiding it under his clothes or something. So the professor speaking with Srila Prabhupada was an intellectual. Others in his school were administrators, still others workers, and so on. By divine design, different classes of people exist, not to exploit, but to cooperate with one another. Oblivious, in other words, forgetful of that design, materialistic classes clash and suffer. The equality we seek fully blossoms in devotional service, where all classes are valued as servants of the Supreme. When these values are forgotten, the Lord's natural Varnashram order becomes corrupted, as India's history shows. So we'll look at India's history for the next way Prabhupada uses the term Varnashram. I call it materialistic Varnashram. And the first reference is from a letter excerpt, Prabhupada writing Dr. Patel, Nehru's deputy prime minister. Quote, the vitiated or corrupted, the vitiated caste system of present India is never sanctioned by the scriptures. Prabhupada wrote Indian Deputy Prime Minister Dr. Sardar Patel. Quote, but the caste system is made by God according to quality and work of the subject and was never designed for the benefit of accidental birthright. So Prabhupada wrote that on the 28th of February, 1949 in Calcutta. Corrupt Brahmins claiming power and privilege based on birth have obscured the truth and beauty of India's original Varnashram culture. Though typecast by the nature we acquire at birth, by engaging in devotional service, we can rise above nature's modes to realize our spiritual potential by cooperatively serving the Lord. This doesn't mean we change varnas, but it means we realize our full spiritual potential within our occupational duty, just like Arjuna. Lacking loving service, too often we compete and bargain with one another. We treat God like Santa Claus, the great order supplier, and we run a ritualistic race to heaven, Svarga. East or West, such materialistic religion wearies us as it wearies God. It's love we're all after, intimate exchanges of selfless service, the spirit of divine Varnashram culture. And the fourth way Prabhupada used Varnashram, I call it Varnashram for modern times. Varnashram that elevates us from material to spiritual consciousness is called Daiva, or divine. Prabhupada's Daiva Varnashram for modern times includes 4 essential features. This is very important. This is what kind of Varnashram Prabhupada was interested in establishing in ISKCON, all over the world, but beginning with ISKCON. 1, pure devotional service to Lord Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, as the goal of life. That's the first and foremost feature. The goal is pure serving Krishna. Number 2, local land and cow economics as the model for sustainable living. This is what Prabhupada meant when he talked about plain living and high thinking. 3, Varnashram colleges for vocational and spiritual retraining. So in Vedic times, there was no need for a Varnashram college. It was just one's occupational duty was passed down from generation to generation in the spirit of devotional service. But today, that's all lost. So there's a need for what Prabhupada called the Varnashram college. And 4, the introduction of Daiva Varnashram principles according to, quote, time, candidate, and country. Borrowing a phrase from the British poet Wordsworth, Prabhupada sometimes referred to Daiva Varnashram as, quote, plain living and high thinking. That was the phrase from Wordsworth. When Krishna descended to earth, he himself lived this way in the rural village of Vrindavan as a boy, and later in clean and green, that's a modern phrase, clean and green Dwaraka city as a youthful prince. If we could show the world a better way to live, Prabhupada reasoned, everyone would eventually take the Daiva Varnashram journey home. So Prabhupada was very clear that it's one thing to tell people about Krishna consciousness, but it's really driven home to people when they see it in action. Prabhupada's vision was the fruit of a lifetime of preaching, but since most modern Hare Krishna people don't live the way Krishna lives, we've been slow to understand how Prabhupada's application of Varnashram to ISKCON evolved over time. So now, to make it doubly challenging, understanding Varnashram, we look at how Prabhupada applied, how he thought about and applied to Varnashram to ISKCON in 3 different ways over 3 phases of time. Prabhupada's application of Varnashram actually evolved the longer he stayed with us. So 3 applications. So the first application, actually, ironically, it took up the majority of the years Prabhupada was with us. What was that application? Well, in effect, Prabhupada said, forget Varnashram. From 1966 to 1973, the majority of his global preaching years, Srila Prabhupada often dismissed Varnashram as impractical. Quote, and here's a quote, a typical quote from that time. Therefore, this is the panacea to engage everyone in Krishna consciousness, chanting Hare Krishna. This is the only remedy. Now you cannot again introduce this system of Varnashram. That was a Gita lecture and at the end of December 1968 in Los Angeles. While he was launching ISKCON, Prabhupada's priority was to put a head back on society. Quote, "At the present moment, the society is headless, a dead body, or head cracked, crazy. There is head, nonsense head. What is the use of nonsense head? Therefore, there is a great necessity of creating a class who will act as brain and head. That is Krishna consciousness movement." That was a 4th of July lecture Prabhupada gave in San Francisco in 1970. Since Brahmins are the head of the Varnashram social body, as much as possible, Prabhupada was engaging his disciples in those early days in Brahminical activities, chanting Hare Krishna, worshiping in the temple, studying and distributing his books, staging spiritual festivals, and so on. For the most part, this strategy worked, but not always, as this exchange with an early follower illustrates. So this is way back in 1966 at the 26 Second Avenue storefront. Prabhupada had one person who was listening to him, who was attracted, but he was also a tough person to tame. So this is a quote from the Lilamrita volume, Planting the Seed, chapter 1. One day after a lecture, Raphael, that was his name, Raphael, approached the Swami, stood beside the dais, and spoke up, exasperated, impatient. Quote, "I am not meant to sit in a temple and chant on beads. My father was a boxer. I am meant to run on the beach and breathe in big breaths of air." Raphael went on, gesticulating and voicing his familiar complaints. Gesticulate means gesturing, and voicing his familiar complaints. Things he would rather do than take up Krishna consciousness. Suddenly, Prabhupada interrupted him in a loud voice. "Then do it! Do it!" Prabhupada's telling him, okay, that's what you want to do, then go and run on the beach. Raphael shrank away, but he stayed. And then I say, and most did stay in those heady days of spiritual revolution, pleased with the counterculture youth flocking to his clarion call to chant Hare Krishna. Prabhupada still wanted to give Krishna consciousness to everyone, including people who would not chant. Soon Krishna would set the world stage to help Prabhupada make Varnashram culture more accessible and urgent, starting with his own followers. So now we go to the second phase of Prabhupada's Varnashram preaching. And I call it, the world needs Varnashram. This was what Prabhupada was saying. In 1973, owing to artificial manipulation of the oil supply in the Middle East, the modern world experienced, quote, an energy crisis. High fuel prices, long fuel lines, and violence dramatized the folly of a civilization that runs on finite fossil fuels. Amidst the angst, Srila Prabhupada saw an opportunity. Walking and talking with leading disciples the following spring, so this is the spring of 74 now, Prabhupada noted that if we could show the public a better way to live, they would be more inclined to listen to Krishna. Quote, because if the people are in chaos, how will they be able to accept the great philosophy? It requires cool brain. So the devotees had been telling Prabhupada that, yeah, they're taking our books now, but sometimes we see that they throw them away or they don't understand them. They don't understand us. We look different. We eat different. We have different values. So Prabhupada said, yeah, because they're totally disturbed by the mode of ignorance. So that was from a morning walk 14th March, Vrindavan 74. Indeed, a brain nourished by fresh milk from protected cows, Prabhupada wrote, quote, can assimilate the subtle form of spiritual knowledge. That's from the Light of the Bhagavat, text 27. To show the world a better way to live, Prabhupada's followers would have to learn and teach the fundamentals of Varnashram culture. Quote, a Varnashram college has to be established immediately, Prabhupada declared. Everywhere, wherever we have got our center, a Varnashram college should be established. So there it is. That's a standing order we have yet to fulfill after, 47 years. Everywhere we've got a center, once people get the basics, they take Bhakti Shastri and, basic courses, but still then they have to learn what their contribution is to the Hare Krishna movement. So Prabhupada said, we need a Varnashram college for this. Okay, let's see here. The devotees were astonished. Why was Prabhupada reversing his attitude toward Varnashram? Because for 7 years he'd been saying, forget it. But as they continued to walk with him, they began to understand his new direction as an extension of his compassion. Quote, devotee, personally, he has no problem, but he pushes himself in this degraded society to teach how to live, how to become gentlemen. Otherwise, we have no business. But if we don't give them the opportunity, they'll not be able to come to Krishna consciousness. So Prabhupada's seeing Varnashram as the bridge, the stepping stone to get people interested in the Krishna consciousness movement. If we just show them a better way to live. And that was from the same morning walk. 14th of March, 74, Vrindavan. Since devotees are already with Krishna, Prabhupada continued, they don't need Varnashram, but humanity needs Varnashram to learn how to live and come to Krishna. It wasn't long before Prabhupada would further extend his compassion by telling the devotees how much they too needed Varnashram. Humanity's, quote, stepping stone for spiritual understanding, unquote. That's right in the Bhagavad Gita, 231 purport. That's the second phase. We're devotees, we don't need it, Prabhupada said at that time. But we need to show them a better way to live. We need to organize ourselves along Varnashram lines to show them that we have actually something practical to offer them. Not that we're just giving them books about something that existed thousands of years ago and they think it's mythology or it's not practical. But we have to show them that we can live better than what's going on in the world. Okay, so that leads us to phase 3. And in phase 3, this is the culmination of preaching. And in there, Prabhupada's telling us point blank, you need Varnashram. On February 14th, 1977, in his headquarters in Mayapur, India, Srila Prabhupada reminded the devotees how important it was for them to inspire and educate people by following Varnashram principles. When a disciple pointed out that Lord Chaitanya dismissed Varnashram as, quote, external, Prabhupada replied, quote, our position is different. Our duty is that we shall arrange the external affairs also nicely, that one day they will come to the spiritual platform very easily, paving the way, unquote. When another disciple wondered why devotees who were already on the spiritual platform, beyond the designations of Varna and Ashram, should follow Varnashram principles, Prabhupada challenged that devotee's assumption. quote, Varnashram should be established to become Vaishnav devotee. It is not so easy to become a Vaishnav. If Vaishnav, to become Vaishnav is so easy, why so many fall down? It is not easy to become Vaishnav. So the context is, this is the last year of Prabhupada's preaching Leela, and so many devotees have come and gone. He's initiated almost 5,000 people, but already even trusted leaders, they are resigning, or they're stepping back, or they're just leaving Krishna consciousness. So Prabhupada's saying, why do you say you're a devotee? You're on the spiritual platform. Why are people falling down? No, they need actually to be themselves. They need to get aboard Krishna consciousness according to their nature, which had not been stressed. More or less, it was just the opposite. We had been, sacrificing our nature just to distribute books, basically. There was men, women, and children out the door distributing books. And you can only do that for so long. You can only perform an emergency mode for so long. Over the long term, everybody has to be engaged according to their nature, as Krishna says in the Gita. The longer Prabhupada preached in the West, the more he saw how even his own followers would need the Varnashram bridge to come to Krishna. As his life on earth was drawing to a close, Prabhupada knew that building the bridge, a bridge the whole world could cross, would be a great challenge. And so the last section is called his Varnashram Challenge. That's the title of the lesson. And I should remind you, because it is the last section, please be formulating your questions. His Varnashram Challenge. In lesson 5, we saw how Srila Prabhupada expanded the Hare Krishna movement in phases. Whereas earlier phases focused on Brahminical concerns and activities, remember holy names and holy books, temples and deity worship, initiation and congregation, those are kind of Brahminical activities. The Varnashram phase invites everyone to help build a spiritual society. In the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 12, texts 8 through 10, Lord Krishna makes a similarly progressive appeal. Quote, just fix your mind on me, Krishna advises the advanced listener. For the less advanced, the Lord then recommends the disciplines of devotional yoga. So that's what most of us are doing. We're sadhana. We're practicing sadhana. We're doing devotional service and practice. Quote, in this way you will develop a desire to attain me. And for those not ready to follow strict vows, Krishna recommends working for him. So that's that final verse in the series. If you cannot follow the rules and regulations of Bhakti Yoga, then just try to work for me. Because by working for me, you will come to the perfect stage. Now, in his commentary to that verse, Prabhupada reaches out to all kinds of readers. Quote, there are many devotees who are engaged in the propagation of Krishna consciousness, and they require help. So, even if one cannot directly practice the regulative principles of Bhakti Yoga, he can try to help such work. Every endeavor requires land, capital, organization, and labor. This voluntary service to the cause of Krishna consciousness will help one to rise to a higher state of love of God, whereupon one becomes perfect. Unquote. Where most people live in or near cities, it is natural to engage them in building temples to attract everyone to Krishna. At the same time, the modern urge to live a simpler, more natural way of life will find fulfillment the more devotees engage people in building spiritual communities that live the way Krishna lives. And here's a quote in that regard. Quote, so this Krishna consciousness movement is trying to revive village organization as you are trying here. Prabhupada's in Gita Nagari, he's telling the devotees this, the ISKCON farm in southeast Pennsylvania. Vrindavan is a village, but it does not mean that we shall avoid city life or town life. No, everything, every place is Krishna's place. Everywhere there should be Krishna consciousness. So that was the one and only, on the one and only day Prabhupada was in Gita Nagari. He was trying to get there again when he came to the West, but it was too much for Prabhupada. But he was on his way to Gita Nagari. He said, I want to sit down and show you how to live in Varnasrama. But he only got as far as England, and he had to go back to spend his last days in Vrindavan. So Prabhupada is saying in that lecture, everywhere there is Krishna, is Krishna's place. Everywhere there should be Krishna consciousness. I'm gonna, all right. Srila Prabhupada's Daiva Varnashram village holds the keys to unlock the modern eco challenge. That's the big door these days, right? Everybody's talking about climate change and being kinder to the earth. I mean, this has been going on. Earth Day is like 50 years old now. In America, we have this Earth Day. So Varnashram culture actually holds it. It's the way to meet the eco challenge. Quote, if these farms become successful, then the whole world will be enveloped by Krishna consciousness, unquote. And since the Varnashram College holds the blueprints to the village, quote, the Varnashram College has to be established immediately everywhere, wherever we have got our center. Town or country, reviving divine Varnashram culture will illumine our natural place in Krishna's world. And by appreciating one another as his eternal servants, we'll find the freedom, equality, and happiness we seek in this life and in the next. Now, having seen the scope of Srila Prabhupada's Varnashram vision in lesson 7, that's next time, we'll look at how to find our individual mission in his greater mission. That's what it's called, finding our mission in his mission. Okay, Hare Krishna Prabhus. I'll be very happy to take your questions now. And let me look. There we go. I can see some faces now. I'm back on the Zoom screen. All right, we have
Yes, questions.
Some time.
Can you once again explain the difference between materialistic Varnashram and Daiva Varnashram? What is materialistic Varnashram and what's the difference between that and materialistic?
So Prabhupada made that distinction in two ways. And I mentioned them. Let me just take a swig here. Every day, triple digits Fahrenheit here. We're constantly drinking in the desert in Arizona. So the first was Prabhupada distinguished Daiva Varnashram from, caste Brahmin Varnashram, where people are claiming their position by birth. And of course, that's got no basis in Shastra. That's the caste Brahmanism. So Krishna says, Chatur Varnyang Mayashashtam Guna Karma. He never said Janma Karma, that we're known by our birth. Of course, in Vedic times, because of the samskars, that if someone was born, for example, in a Brahmin family, because of the training and the culture, there was a good chance that they could turn out that way, or Kshatriya or Vaishya, etc. So materialistic varnashram is when people are not understanding the purpose of true Daiva Varnashram culture, transcendental Varnashram. The purpose is to go back to Godhead and to cooperate. For example, you're looking at my head, okay? So, in the body, the head is like the brahminical part of the body. But if I hurt my foot, which is kind of like, the lower part, you could say, the legs and the feet, they're the Shudra part. But just because they're the lower part doesn't mean that if there's some problem there that I'm going to neglect them. No, I'm going to, if I hurt my foot, I'm going to use my brain to figure out how to repair it and heal it. In this way, all the Varnas appreciate one another as being absolutely necessary. The head is the Brahmins, the arms are the Kshatriyas, the waist is the Vaishyas, the legs carry all the other Varnas. The legs assist and support all the other. If it wasn't for the Shudra Varna, who's going to do the work? The modern word for Shudra is employee. Employee. Most of us are employees. We're assisting, a boss. We're working for the boss. So, and also in Vedic culture, most people are in Shudra Varna. Different kinds of Shudras too, like Ramananda Roy. He was a Kayasta, which was a kind of Shudra. So anyway, yeah. So that was the first way Prabhupada would distinguish. He would distinguish Daiva Varnashram from, caste conscious Varnashram, Varnashram by birth, Janma Varnashram, which is bogus. It's got no basis in scripture. And the other way Prabhupada would distinguish Daiva Varnashram was he would talk about karma kanda. When people are pursuing karma kanda, which is, most people who call themselves Hindus. They're into heavenly elevation and worshiping this deva and doing that ritual and that's they're materialistic. They just want to promote themselves materially. They want to go to Svarga. So Daiva Varnashram got nothing to do with materialistic Varnashram. It's all about surrendering to Krishna, realizing our full spiritual potential, and going back to Godhead. Good question. Another one?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Please describe the roles and responsibilities of the Varnashram College.
Good question, because we've never done it. We haven't touched it, Although I'll tell you a story. In 1991, there was a GBC resolution passed. It was what they call a correspondence resolution. This is the days before, the GBC was meeting. Now they're meeting on Zoom. They're not even meeting face to face. So anyway, they used to have these correspondence resolutions. I think they still might do this. It's once a year, it's the AGM in Mayapur. And who knows when we're going to get back to that face to face. But so they would talk. Yeah, this is the years before the midterm. They used to have, pre-COVID, there was midterm meeting. So, but before that, there was just once a year, and so many issues would build up, and therefore the whole thing was bottlenecked, log jammed at the AGM, and it was frustrating for the GBC, frustrating for the devotees. Things would build up, and then there was so much on the agenda, nothing could get done because there wasn't time to thoroughly vet all the issues. Now they have the deputies to vet the issues, and now they have midterm meetings. But anyway, in 1991, there was a correspondence resolution because let's see, in 1991, it was only 17 years after Prabhupada gave that Varnashram college order. So the GBC, painfully aware that Prabhupada had said that 17 years earlier in 1974, and so they drafted a resolution that we have to get moving on this. We have to research how to start a Varnashram college. It means we actually have to understand ourselves. Before we can teach the public about Varnashram culture, we have to learn it ourselves because it's lost. It's lost. So, so they passed this resolution that we have to, all of Prabhupada's instructions, have to be thoroughly researched. Now, this is before the days of the Veda base. The Veda base wasn't there yet. I mean, the archives, the Bhaktivedanta archives, it was kind of in an embryonic state. It was sort of forming informally. Some of my godbrothers were doing it informally in Los Angeles before they finally incorporated it themselves. So there wasn't even so much, access to Prabhupada's Vani the way we have it now. Anyway, so the GBC passes resolution, and then, and I didn't even know this, but then and then in the meeting in 1992 at the AGM, because that was a winter resolution, in 91, and then in 92 in the spring, the resolution was confirmed and ratified at the AGM. And I hadn't seen the resolutions, but somebody called me up. I was, to support my family, I was selling oil paintings in a mall, about an hour and a half from Gitanagari. And so the person, he was a friend of mine, and he called me up and he just played a trick on me. He said, congratulations, Prabhu. Congratulations, Mr. Chairman. I said, what? Who's this? And so he said who he was. Oh, so-and-so. So nice to hear you. So what do you mean, congratulations? What's going on? He said, you didn't hear? The GBC just passed this resolution for we have to now study all of Prabhupada's instructions on Varnashram. And it's like an ocean. There's so many instructions. And you're the chairman of this committee. You're the chair. No one had even told me. So I got it, And so I said, oh, now in this resolution, Prabhu, is there a budget? Are there any funds allocated to do this research? Because it's going to require a lot of, it's going to require funds to do all this research, and because not everything was at our fingertips in those days. And all of a sudden he said, oh, I didn't see anything in the resolution about funds or assistance, So there I was, a struggling householder, a baby daughter. And so I just said, okay, gotcha. I get it. It's the same old, same old. So then what I did was, and probably the reason the GBC even named me was because in those days, in the 1980s and in the early 90s too, I was writing in Back to Godhead. I was writing the Plain Living and High Thinking column for Back to Godhead, because I was living at Gitanagari, where we were doing really, cutting edge stuff. We were working the oxen, we were milking the cows. Our herd of brown Swiss cows had gotten the award in the state of Pennsylvania for being the best herd in our breed in the whole state. And Pennsylvania was the 5th largest dairy state. So we were recognized, by our deeds. And we were putting out the ISKCON Farm newsletter. showing other farms how to take care of cows and train bulls to work as oxen. So I was writing a lot of pieces for BTG. It was called Plain Living and High Thinking column. So the GBC must have known that I must have thought that I knew something about plain living and high thinking. I was just a writer. I didn't know how to farm or grow, or I just know how to write. But I was living there. I was on location. That was my home. So whenever I got inspired to write about an aspect of plain living and high thinking, I would go out into the field with the men, and I would follow them around and participate and do a little work. But mainly then I'd go back to my room and I'd write up my notes, you know, and when I had enough notes, then I would write a piece. So people to this day, they think I know something about how to take care of cows and work oxen. I just know how to write, that's all. Anyway, so what I did was, and I knew it was very important at the same, even though it was, to me, it was a joke because there was no help and there was no funds, that the GBC had passed this. It was kind of like, you know, so still, I knew it was important because I was focused on this, because I was living in a community that knew the importance of this. So I said, okay, to myself, I said, okay, what I'm going to do, I had a friend, and it's a Mataji. Her name is Hari Krishna Dasi. And see, I was in the process of actually transitioning. I was withdrawing from Gita Nagari. I lived near the farm. I was selling my house, and I was going to move to India. My wife and I had this dream of raising our daughter in South India, where there was still some culture. And we had this invitation to live, I think you know it as the Bhaktivedanta Eco Village in Western Karnataka. So we were going to explore that. So yeah, so we did. Anyway, that's another story. So before I left, though, I handed off my assignment. I called up Hare Krishna Mataji, who had been living in Gita Nagari, and then she had to go back to Maine, the state of Maine, which is extreme northeast US. And she had to take care of her husband, who was developing a disease called multiple sclerosis. Happily, that's in remission now, and he's doing better. But she is a great historian. She's a great writer, a great thinker. And so you may have seen a book. It's called Speaking About Varnasrama, which the Varnasrama, ministry still, I think, keeps in print in India. And there's a picture on the cover of, yes, there you go. Okay, that's a new cover. That's a new cover. I have the original cover. Yeah, that's a good one. Thank you. Speaking About Varnasrama. And what Hare Krishna Mataji, and that was a projected first volume of a multi-volume series. Now I forget, what was the question now? I'm getting far afield. What was the question?
What are the roles and responsibilities of a Varnashram college?
Okay, so Hari Krishna Dasi, she did all the research. I was basically away from 93 to 95. We ultimately didn't make it in India, although we learned a lot. We came back, we found another community called Prabhupada Village in North Carolina. And I called her up and I said, hey, Hari Krishna Dasi, how's the research going? She said, it's going great. We got enough material here. I mean, Prabhupada spoke so much about Varnashram. We got enough material here for maybe 5 volumes on Varnashram. And there's a whole curriculum. There's enough material here to write a whole curriculum about, what does it mean? What does it mean to be a Brahmin or a Kshatriya or a Vaishya or a Shudra in the modern context? And what does it mean to be a brahmachari or brahmacharini? That was Prabhupada's innovation. Brahmachari, brahmacharini, grihastha, vanaprastha, sannyas. what does it mean? How do you do this in the modern age? So we got enough. So anyway, long story short, we did get that first volume published through the archives, which was based then in the community in Prabhupada Village. They're still there. But the governing body, by the time the archives published that book, the GBC itself, the membership in the GBC had turned over a lot. There was a lot of different faces, and even the people who proposed that resolution, they were no longer in ISKCON. They were very Varnashram focused, these leaders, but they themselves, because of their personal problems, they had to step back from ISKCON, and happily they're doing better. They're involved again. But so that's the kind of stuff that ISKCON was going through. And still today, we haven't done much, but at least we have people like His Holiness Shivaram Swami, who's carrying the baton, the Varnashram baton, because he has this, Krishna Valley in Hungary, and he's written a book, the first volume of his own Varnashram series. So at least it's recognized more as being important. So to how to do it, it's still kind of uncharted territory. So we haven't done it yet. Although the community that I would say comes the closest in terms of all the Varnas and all the ashrams, and having an educational facility going already. There's a place in Europe called Radhadesh. They have a Bhaktivedanta college there. It's mostly online now. They have the Goshala, and they're more or less focused on Brahman and Vaishya Varnas right now. So, but it will happen differently in different contexts. In India, I know there's different initiatives. So it's up to the younger generations to do that research. I mean, the research is done. Actually, I'd heard something very encouraging recently. Because the GBC didn't really respond to that first volume, then Hari Krishna Dasi, she more or less got frustrated and she stepped back from ISKCON. And now I hear that there's interest in publishing her research. So that's good, because I know that she doesn't bluff. When she says there's enough material to have a curriculum for Varnashram College, all the Varnas and all the ashrams, she means it. So I hope she is supported to turn her research into curriculum for Varnashram College. We'll see. Okay, next question.
Thank you, Prabhu. The next question is, Varnashram that Srila Prabhupada wanted us to follow is based on land and cows. Is serving according to one's nature for expanding preaching in cities also called Varnashram?
Yes, very good question. Yeah, it does. After hearing this lesson, in fact, the next lesson kind of balances this lesson, because after hearing Prabhupada's revolutionary vision to bring the world to Krishna consciousness through the plain living and high thinking communities. When you hear the word, when you hear Prabhupada say farms, don't just think farming, which is the basis of it, but think village, where the full range of plain living and high thinking occupations can manifest. Like at Gita Nagari, we had people doing herbs, for medicine, and we had people doing drying and canning, because the climate in the West, very often in the northern latitudes, you can't grow but maybe half the year. You have to know how to preserve that food. So we had a very good system of drying and canning our food. And it was very fertile land. It was a fertile valley. And so we would, be able to enjoy, we would be able to offer the deities good, fresh vegetables through drying and canning. Yeah, it was good. And then the milk and the milk products was all year. That was really good. That was real milk. Yeah, it wasn't the stuff you buy in the store. So I'm sorry, say the question again.
Prabhupada wanted us to follow, Varnashram that Srila Prabhupada wanted us to follow was based on land and cows.
Yeah, based on land and cows. And then in the city though. Okay, so yeah, based on that lesson I just presented, you might think we should, if we're really serious, we should just quit our jobs and move to the country, and, we should just abandon the cities. But no, that's where the people are. So Prabhupada's Varnashram strategy, it was a constellation of initiatives where most of the devotees actually are still preaching in the cities where most of the people still live. I mean, actually in India, I know it's still mostly, in the villages, but still the big cities is where, they're the trendsetters. There's where everybody is worshiping what's going on in the cities. So in Prabhupada's Daiva Varnashram, according to our nature, especially if we're already established, if somebody's already in the corporate culture, it's not that they have to quit their job. You'll see in the next lesson, it all ends up with Prabhupada appealing to people from all walks of life, all varnas, to keep doing what you're doing, but support the Daiva Varnashram vision, because more and more, as Kali Yuga gets more and more chaotic, I mean, these cities are becoming more and more unlivable. They're just, and the pandemic exposed that, all the disparities, between in healthcare, in basic healthcare. I mean, people, as you well know, in India, just if they weren't well connected, they just died of COVID right in the street. They died in the parking lot waiting for oxygen. Yeah. So unless they were, unless they knew people, they just died right there. So there's so much inequality in education, in healthcare. There's so much prejudice. Here in America, it's racism. There you have casteism. So that's all bogus. It's all based on birth, So we find equality and freedom and cooperation and harmony is on the spiritual platform in Daiva Varnashram. So here's how it works. In the city, that's where most of the people are. And that's where we have our temples, our big temples. Why? Because that's where the people are. And they're like portals. They're like gateways to the spiritual world. Now, once people come into our temples and they get a vision, they get darshan of Bhagavan, Sri Krishna, Krishnastu Bhagavan Svayam, then they get inspired by the Gita, by Bhagavatam, by festivals and by Prabhupada's books. But then over time, if they're really tuned in to Prabhupada's Vani, they want to see an example of what's going on in the books. It's not just something 5,000 years ago that Krishna took care of cows, or Dwarka, this amazing city, and now we just have a few remnants, right? So they want Krishna culture on earth. So, so then there's the city temples. So then also Prabhupada told us, in the West at least, I'm not sure about in India, but he told us about we also need to be where the students are. So in America, very often the colleges, they're in the cities, but often the college towns in America, they're in these nice kind of suburban, well-kept places where the colleges are a little, you know, their own little protected bubble, where there's ivy, you know, and it's a little green. And I mean, they're in the cities too, but you know, the better colleges are kind of suburban or even in the country. And Prabhupada said, in these college towns, you should have a restaurant there, you know, Govinda's or Hare Krishna restaurant, however you call it. And you should have a reading room. So they get food for the body and food for the spirit, food for the mind. They can read, a place where they can read Prabhupada's books and take Krishna Prasad. And this way they become receptive to Krishna culture. And Prabhupada really wanted us to attract the students. And you're doing a great job in India very often, recruiting students. And then, once they get inspired by Prabhupada's messages, then, and they're young. So when you're students, you're not necessarily already committed and established in the corporate culture, right? In India, you know, you can still join the ashram, or you can go work in the corporate culture and support what's going on. I'm thinking now of Chowpatty, now how they have, you know, they have Chowpatty, but then they have Govardhan Eco Village. And in Bombay, they also have Mira Road Temple. And of course, they have Juhu. So Prabhupada wanted both. He wanted us to preach in the city. He wanted us to show an example of plain living and high thinking in the country, in the village, so that it would all work together. He wanted us to reach the students with restaurants and reading rooms. So it's a cooperative effort. And because Kali Yuga is the way it is, it's just going to be like that. Prabhupada was going for the masses and the classes. The class, you know, the best of them, and also the mass. So the mass, for the masses, we have kirtan, prasad, and then for the class, we have our literature. So he wanted it all. Okay, we still have some time. Are there any more questions?
Yes, Prabhu, there are more questions.
But you will see next lesson more how there's a place for everyone in Prabhupada's movement. Don't worry that you have to, you know, sell everything and go live in the country. And most of us aren't even fit for that. And the way we get these villages going is we should actually be attracting people who are already in that Varna, who already like to take care of cows and work bulls, who already know how to grow, who already know how to preserve food, and they already know village crafts. There's a lot of people like that, but we don't necessarily reach them. So we have to reach all the Varnas and all the ashrams. Okay, go ahead.
The next question, if every center is supposed to have a Varnashram college, what is the basic training we must have to start teaching? This seems...
Okay, in the college or in the temple?
The college.
Okay, well, I already addressed that. We have to, well, Prabhupada said on those walks, we have to teach them, because once you're in the college, it presumes, if you're a devotee, that you've already gone through basic training in the temples. So that's why Prabhupada said, you know, near the temples. So the college is a place where you graduate from, you know, your basic training to get further training in your Varna and your ashram. And specifically what Prabhupada wanted, he wanted the Varnashram college in terms of the devotees. He wanted non-devotees there too. It is a way to attract them to Krishna culture. But Prabhupada was saying Gurukula is for basically primary education up to the age of, well, puberty, 10 to 12, like that. And then once everybody has their basic education, they learn how to read and write, and basic subjects that everybody has to learn. We say general knowledge. Then in the Varnashram college, with the help of the parents, ideally, if the parents are devotees, and the teachers, then the mentors in the Varnashram college will help those youngsters, young people, focus on what they're naturally attracted to. And this sort of goes on anyway, in higher education. As people grow up, they learn what their nature is. Of course, it's not really organized around devotional service. It's just, it's kind of whimsical. How can I make money by what I like to do? Right? It's all based on money, basically. So, but in the Varnashram college, and it's challenging, you'll see in the next lesson, because in Kali Yuga, we're not just of one mode. Our gunas are all kind of mixed up in Kali Yuga. We're not purely in, it's said that the Brahmin is in the mode of goodness, and the Kshatriya in the mode of passion, and the Vaishya in the mode of passion and ignorance, and the Shudra in ignorance. Well, it's not like that. In Kali Yuga, even Brahminical people, you'll find they have tamasic habits. Everything is really all mixed up. But even given that, in the Varnashram college, with the help of the parents and the Varnashram mentors, they can help the young student focus really on what his kind of default mode is, mode of nature, so that he can specialize in that. He's already learned his general knowledge, and now it's time for him to focus to learn what his best contribution can be to Prabhupada's mission. It's really for the re-spiritualization of human society. And it's also for the girls too. At one place, Prabhupada said, no, it's just for the boys. But later on, he also said, it's for the girls. So that's revolutionary, right? In classic Vedic culture, the girls are just homemakers. And certainly that's great. That's a great, they're moms. They bear children and they keep the home nice. But it's not like that in Kali Yuga. Everything is mixed, and all over the world. The girls are also getting educated too, and they might have a great contribution in education or in leadership even. Yeah, it just depends on their guna and their karma, their quality and their natural activities. Of course, they should always be protected. Okay, we're getting close to time. Are there any more questions?
There is a curious question. Are the Varnashram villages that Prabhupada's devotees had set up, which we see in the various YouTube videos, still functional?
Well, which one are you talking about?
They've not mentioned it here.
I mean, it's different in different parts of the world. At Gitanagari, I lived there off and on for 13 years. That's been through a lot of changes and evolution. Right now, Gitanagari is doing well because they've kind of reinvented themselves as an ahimsa dairy. Ahimsa products are huge in America. People want, especially animal rights people, vegans, animal liberation people, they know, so a lot of them know that the human body needs milk and milk products, but they don't want to participate in, the slaughterhouse industry, which is, the dairy industry and the slaughterhouse slaughterhouses, they're one. It's like a marriage. It's like an unholy marriage. As soon as the dairyman, as soon as his cows get old, they slit their throat, they sell them to the slaughterhouse. So they don't want to participate in that. So at Gitanagari, we have protected cows. It's still brown Swiss, that's the herd. And they're really good. They're really, they're suitable for different kinds of climates. They have a good nature, and they give a good balance of quantity and butterfat richness in the milk. So Gitanagari supports itself by selling milk and milk products, and I believe now they're getting into the produce from the field too. They're selling their their fruits and vegetables, and of course they have enough. They're growing enough to consume, offer to Radha Damodar, the deities. But they're holding their own, they're becoming a popular place for yogis and seekers and ahimsa, people to come, because they have seminars. They teach seminars on plain living and high thinking, how to do it. So that's successful. New Vrindavan, that was the first ISKCON farm. Of course, I'm just speaking to you from the American experience because that's what I know best. They've really been through the mill over the years. But more or less, they do have an eco part of New Vrindavan, which is ironic to say because it's in the hills of West Virginia. So they're really in the country. Gitanagari is too, but New Vrindavan's even more remote. So they have cow protection and ox power on a small scale, and they grow on a small scale. But more or less, they support themselves on they call ecotourism. They have many nice cottages they've built in the country in New Vrindavan for especially around this time of year. It's huge, and especially the Indian community comes and they not just the Indian community, but so many come. It's such a nice place to be in the summer, New Vrindavan. And they have Prabhupada's palace. So this supports the community. It supports the temple. And then the devotees who live around New Vrindavan, they've learned, many of them, how to live in the country and support themselves also. Because you see, the challenge is it's a money economy, right? I mean, we can talk about the days of yore, the old days when it was all bartering, and Nanda Maharaj, he would bring his milk products, and then somebody else would have grain, and cloth, and but that's the Vedic days of yore. And you can do that a little bit, but what makes it all go is paper money. So there has to be a way of getting that too. So as long as that's true, then we're going to be living in two different worlds. So so in Hungary, they're doing better than ever. Shivaram Swami's, I know they're doing very well. If you see it you might see videos on Dandavats or whatever. I know Bhakti Vikash Maharaj is sort of holding his own in terms of, his village in Salem. And I think it's in Tamil Nadu, yeah? Yeah. So, but it's difficult because people grow up, even in India, as you know, people grow up and they get enamored by the city and by Bollywood and by the idea of easygoing life, push button life and technology, and so it's a challenge to combat that propaganda. We have to actually understand the value of plain living and high thinking. Otherwise, it just seems like a lot of hard work. Why do it? Okay.
Oh, there's one.
Okay, it looks like, yeah. Okay, I'll just take one quick one because it's time to end.
Yeah, just is the default Varna for practicing devotees in ISKCON the Brahmana class? Please help my understanding. Especially in the
good question. Yeah, that's where the confusion is, because as I mentioned in the beginning of the movement, Prabhupada was pushing that. He was pushing the Brahminical Varna because the society, as Prabhupada always said, is headless. Or even if it has a head, it's full of cow dung, and that's being generous because cow dung is valuable. So because it's a society without a head, in other words, it doesn't know the goal of life, the direction of life, Prabhupada called it headless. So he was pushing us in those early days to do just Brahminical things. Although right in the beginning, there was New Vrindavan too came along. But it was mainly the city temples and book distribution. And he was big on people studying his books. But the more time went on, the more Prabhupada saw that even his own followers were having a hard time just distributing books and just worshiping the deity, and a lot of them couldn't even maintain their diksha vows, So Prabhupada saw that most people over time, if they were going to make it in Krishna consciousness, they needed to be situated according to their natural varna. We're going to be looking at this again. This question anticipates the next lesson. So, and you will also, well, I can mention this because this was part of this lesson too. How in that last stage of applying Varnashram to ISKCON, February 1977 in India, when they were saying, oh, but Lord Chaitanya said it's external, and Prabhupada said, yeah, but Lord Chaitanya is in Mahabhav. So you're chanting like Lord Chaitanya? You can't even chant 16 rounds properly. You can't even follow the 4 regulative principles. Why are my trusted leaders leaving? So we need Varnashram to get stabilized, to get aboard Krishna consciousness, to become even a Praya, an aspiring Vaishnav. So, and then a devotee said, but Prabhupada, in our temples, after 6 months a year, people take first initiation. Harinam, which Prabhupada made it clear, that was a chance, that was an opportunity to complete the initiation. Prabhupada Bhaktisiddhanta started this. It was in 2 steps, Harinam and then Gayatri. So Prabhupada followed him. We'll do the same thing. So Harinam was like a chance to see if you could follow. Of course, even before you took Harinam, you were supposed to be observed and tested to see if you could follow the principles and chant 16 rounds. And then only you were given Harinam. And then if you were steady with that, if you were steady with your vows, then after 6 months a year, again, the devotee said, and then Prabhupada, and then they get Brahminical initiation. So it's kind of like it was automatic. And what's the facility of Gayatri Diksha was to offer the candidate an opportunity to increase their service to the deities, to cook for the deities, to dress the deities, to offer arti, to worship the deity, and also to speak. Somebody is twice initiated, it should be that the person has a taste for studying Prabhupada's books, and he can sit on the asan, the Vyas asan, and give class. So it's a facility for preaching and a facility for deity worship. But if one's nature is not that, then there's no need. If they can't be steady in those vows. So when the devotee said, but Prabhupada, after, in other words, it was just by time, just by existing in the movement for a year or two, you could end up, with a Brahmin thread and be called a Brahmin. So Prabhupada said, why? Why automatically like that? Why make, what did Prabhupada say? Why make a farce, or why be ludicrous? If a person's not fit like that, then let him remain Shudra. Now what he meant was, let him remain in that Varna. Let him remain in that Varna. But if he can, follow his vows of Krishna consciousness, if he can chant 16 rounds, and he can follow the 4 regulative principles, but his nature is not, worshiping the deity or studying, then Prabhupada's and giving class, and Prabhupada said, why make a farce? And then he would quote the Gita verse, Swakarmana tamabhyarcha. Swakarmana. Now hear, O son of Pita, how by following one's qualities of work, one can become perfect. By worship of the Lord, the next verse, who is all pervading, a person can attain perfection. So Prabhupada said he can retain perfection by following his qualities of work. So somebody, say, is really good with the bulls, working the bulls. I know, living at Gitanagari in the summer, the only time the men who were good at working the bulls could work those bulls when it was really hot and humid was right during the time when it was time to chant japa. So they sacrificed that japa period for going out in the fields when it was still a little cool, at 6 a.m, and they would plow. And then later on, when it was a little, in the heat of the day, when you couldn't work, it was too hot anyway with the oxen, then they would go in the temple with their beads and they would chant. So it was a different kind of a schedule. So the Varnas and the ashrams, they all have their duties and they all have their timings. And but yeah, most people aren't in Brahminical Varna, just a very small percentage. In any given population group, maybe 5% will be priests and teachers. I mean, there's 64 different kinds of brahmanas. There's puja brahmanas, there's yogic brahmanas, shastra brahmanas, but most people are not in that varna at all. And then you get more as you go down. You get, what I call soldiers and statesmen, or also, the head of, because Kshatriya Dharma, somebody's good at management. He's good at protection, he's good at management, so that could include soldiers. It could include a CEO of a corporation is a kind of Kshatriya if he's in the right mood. Mostly, everybody's bandhu, Brahma bandhu, Kshatriya bandhu, Vaishya bandhu, Shudra bandhu. They're not even true Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra. They're just sort of, relatives of the twice born. They're sort of, what do you call it? Reflections of that varna. They're not really even, because the goal of life is not going back to Godhead. So in ISKCON, we don't have to be in the Brahmana Varna. We don't have to be Brahmana Vaishnavas. We can be Brahmana Vaishnavas, okay, that's priests and teachers. We can be Kshatriya Vaishnavas, we can be Vaishya Vaishnavas, Shudra Vaishnavas, because there are all those classes are needed. But what makes us Vaishnavas or Praya Vaishnavas is that we're actually able to follow the instructions of Guru and Krishna. Yeah. Okay, I better leave you with that. And next time it's called Finding Our Mission. And I could have just as easily called it Finding Our Mentors, because it's really about people who can help us realize our full potential as devotees. Finding our mission in the mission, finding our mentors in the mission. And it's a lot of fun. It's a different kind of lesson. We go into the modern context, and it gives us hope that we don't have to abandon our position. Mahaprabhu said, Stane stitak, shutigatang tanuvan manobir. Just stay in your natural place, but hear about Krishna. That's what we all have in common. Okay, Prabhus, I'm glad we got it together. Yeah, it's about finding our Swadharma. I see yeah. And don't expect that it's going to happen presto overnight in one class. It's actually a life's journey. It's a life's mission. But we can point you in the right direction anyway. Okay. Thank you so much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna.
So much, Prabhuji. We are already looking forward for the next session.
Yes.
Hare Krishna.
I designed it like that. They're all cliffhangers. They all lead to the next one. Haribol.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.